Don't go, Papa.
Can you imagine being declared dead by your own husband while you were still fighting for your life in a hospital bed? That's exactly what happened to Amahle N'Dour, a mother of 3, betrayed in the most brutal way. While she battled cancer, her husband Kwame Diallo faked her death, forged documents, and held a lavish funeral with no body in the casket. Why? To steal her assets and launch the Amahle Foundation, a humanitarian front used to launder money and build his image as the perfect husband. But here's the truth no one expected. Amahle was still alive. Secretly rescued by her nurse friend, she went into hiding under the name Naledi Jama, raising her children in silence, her true identity buried. Years later, a journalist uncovers financial fraud in the foundation. At the same time, Kwame's pregnant mistress finds forged papers and turns against him. The stage is set for one unforgettable night. At the foundation's glamorous gala, just as Kwame is praised as a devoted widower, a woman in a black dress walks onto the stage and says, "My name is Amahle N'Dour. I was never dead." Gasps fill the room. Cameras roll live. The mistress hands over proof. Police storm in. Kwame is arrested on the spot. This isn't about revenge. Amahle came back for something deeper, to reclaim her name, her truth, and her place in the world. Stay with this story, because some identities once buried rise again to demand the light. The church bells tolled like iron hammers striking through the fog of the city morning, their echoes tumbling down the marble steps where crowds gathered in black. Cameras flashed in bursts of artificial lightning, bathing the carved stone facade of the cathedral in flickers of white. The heavy doors opened, and the first thing that emerged was not a face, not even a hand to wave farewell, but the closed sheen of a coffin, dark mahogany polished to a mirror. It moved on the shoulders of solemn men in black suits, swaying slightly with each measured step, while the press leaned forward like wolves scenting blood. Inside, they said, lay Amahle N'Dour, mother of 3, lost to cancer before her time. Yet no one could see her. The lid would never open. Inside the cathedral, the air was thick with incense, sweet smoke curling into the golden arches where saints' faces glowed in stained glass. Reporters clustered near the back, whispering notes, while mourners filled the pews in black silk and wool, their whispers drowned by the organ's long, low breath. The pulpit rose like a ship's prow above the congregation, and the minister, with his silver hair shining beneath the vaulted ceiling, lifted his hands. His voice trembled with grief, rehearsed into dignity. He spoke of courage, of a battle against sickness, of a wife and mother whose strength had inspired many. Each word fell like petals into the air, soft but heavy. Yet beneath those words lay a silence too dense to break. No one had seen her at the end. Not a neighbor, not a child, not a friend. In the front row, Kwame Diallo sat straight-backed in a charcoal suit, his hands folded around a small lace handkerchief that he never used. His jaw clenched, his eyes glistened. He pressed a hand against his chest, as if steadying his heart. The cameras caught it, the perfect angle of a man grieving with dignity. Beside him, leaning close, was Nia Kanda. Her dress was simple black satin, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, as if to anchor him to the living. When he tilted his face into her palm, the room sighed with sympathy. The image was caught again and again. Kwame, the devoted husband, crushed by loss but held by love, the very model of a man who carried sorrow with grace. The flashes went off, and the crowd murmured, admiring his loyalty. He rose to his feet at the end of the minister's words, his arm tightening around Nia, as if he might fall. He pressed his forehead to the coffin for one long moment, a tear sliding down his cheek before the pallbearers lifted it toward the altar. The congregation wept openly now, moved by the sight. Women dabbed their eyes, men swallowed hard, children stared in wide-eyed silence. The story was complete. The young mother had fallen, the faithful husband endured. Outside, headlines were already being typed. Beloved Amahle N'Dour, laid to rest. Husband remains, pillar of strength. The story of devotion was writing itself in real time. The final note of the organ hung in the air, like a ribbon stretched thin, then broke. The service was done. Mourners drifted out beneath the marble arch, speaking in hushed voices of Amahle's bravery, of Kwame's faithfulness, of the way Nia had stepped into the role of comforter with such quiet dignity. No one mentioned that the coffin had never opened. No one asked why the woman's face had not been shown. The official story had already closed the lid, tighter than any nail could, and yet, miles away, in a narrow room that smelled of bleach and damp plaster, a small television flickered in the corner. Its screen showed the same coffin, the same man pressing his forehead to its surface. The sound was tinny, but clear enough to carry the minister's solemn tone into the dim space. On a thin bed, Amahle lay trembling. Her skin was pale against the hospital gown, her hair brittle from treatments that had drained her body. The IV line shivered with each shallow movement of her arm. She lifted her head with effort, her eyes locking on the screen, where her own funeral played out without her. Her breath rasped as she reached toward the plastic tray where a folded newspaper lay. Someone had left it, perhaps the nurse who barely spoke. The headline sprawled in black across the page, Amahle N'Dour, remembered with tears and grace. Beneath, a photo of Kwame clutching Nia's hand, his eyes shining with grief. Amahle's fingers trembled as they brushed the ink. Her lips parted, and a dry sound escaped, halfway between a sob and a whisper. The page blurred as her tears struck, spreading ink like bruises across the smiling faces. Her children's names echoed in her mind, their voices she could almost hear, small feet pounding, laughter spilling like water. She had not held them since the hospital doors closed. She had not seen them since Kwame signed the forms. Now the world believed she was ashes in an urn, gone by her own wish. The screen showed the coffin sliding deeper into the cathedral light, swallowed by incense and ritual. Her hand clutched the newspaper so tightly the paper tore, edges crumpling under her nails. "Don't let them take my name," she breathed, barely a sound. Her throat burned with the effort. She pressed the paper against her chest as if it might anchor her to herself, to life, to the truth that refused to vanish no matter how many documents bore the seal of death. The monitor beside her beeped in steady rhythm, counting her fragile persistence. The walls seemed to press closer, the air damp with mold and silence. Outside the door, a cart rattled, wheels squeaking, but no one entered. She was hidden here, tucked away while the city mourned a ghost. On the television, the coffin was lifted once more. A reporter's voice broke through the cathedral hush, announcing that Amahle had been cremated in accordance with her hospital-filed wishes. The words rang false in her ears, yet they were spoken with authority, stamped with certainty. She shut her eyes, the paper still clutched in her fist, and her body shuddered with a sob that no one would hear. The world had buried her alive, sealed her in a story she had not written. Far above the cathedral steps, pigeons scattered into the pale sky, their wings flashing white against the stone. The mourners filed away, their tears drying into memory. Kwame raised a hand to the crowd, a gesture of gratitude, of resilience. Nia walked at his side, her face solemn, her eyes downcast in perfect poise. Photographers captured every frame. The myth had been born. The noble widower, the sainted wife, the loyal companion. The coffin vanished into the waiting hearse, its doors closing with a final metallic thud. Silence followed, thick as earth falling into a grave. But in the dim little room where Amahle clung to the torn newspaper, silence was not final. It was defiance. Her heart, weak but unbroken, beat against the lie. Each pulse was a drum, each tear a vow. She would not be erased. She pressed her forehead to the newsprint, her breath fogging the ink, and whispered again into the emptiness. "Don't let them take my name." The words dissolved into the hum of the television, into the slow drip of the IV, into the faint murmur of life that refused to yield, and there the chapter ended, in the clash between the grand cathedral, where the world declared her gone, and the forgotten room where she still lived, her identity sealed away in a coffin that carried nothing but silence. The crystal chandeliers trembled under the weight of camera flashes, their gold arms scattering light like fire across the grand ballroom. The air was thick with perfume, with champagne fizzing against crystal rims, with the hum of polite laughter that carried an undertone of hunger. In the center, standing tall with his hand resting on the arm of Nia Kande, Kwame Diallo moved like a man rehearsing glory. Every eye turned when he lifted his glass. The violin quartet hushed. The reporters edged closer. 1,000 bulbs flared in quick succession, catching the sweat on his brow, the solemn tilt of his head, the way his fingers brushed Nia's waist, as though anchoring himself to beauty itself. The audience wanted a survivor, a hero. He gave them one. He spoke of loss, of how Amahle's fight with illness had shaped him, of how his children were the light that kept him breathing. His voice cracked perfectly on cue, just enough to draw a murmur of sympathy, just enough to make the crowd believe that grief had carved him into marble. Then his tone shifted, steady as a hand guiding a blade, and he announced the creation of a foundation. The Amahle Foundation, he called it, for cancer patients too poor to fight with dignity. The room erupted into applause. Cameras swung, pens scratched, and already the headlines were forming. The widower who turned sorrow into service. Behind him, a vast banner draped in golden silk unfurled, letters shining like flame against velvet. In her name, we heal. The cloth shimmered with every flash, a veil of radiance concealing the rot beneath. Nia smiled faintly, her eyes lowered in humility, though her hand clung to Kwame's arm with pride. She wore the role of comforter to perfection. Beside them, donors scribbled checks, their pens scratching greedily, while they whispered of tax shelters and public honor. The orchestra swelled again, and the golden cloth gleamed brighter, as if mocking the truth that no one dared to name. Amahle was not ashes in an urn. She was still alive, hidden in the shadows far from the light that now celebrated her death. Among the crowd, a woman stood still, her figure wrapped in modest navy blue, her gaze sharp behind simple glasses. Zuri Adebayo, once a nurse at the hospital where Amahle had been treated, now drifted between conversations like smoke. She listened, nodded politely, and slipped through the glittering guests until she reached the edge of the ballroom, where staff carried trays of champagne. Her fingers brushed a folded envelope hidden in her purse. Earlier that week, she had pulled files no one was meant to see. A death certificate signed in haste, its ink blurred on the edges, its date inconsistent with medical logs. A cremation order, stamped with urgency, though no ash had ever been collected. She had stood in the cold hospital corridor under flickering light, her hand trembling as she traced the signatures that did not belong. The paper had smelled of toner and deceit. Now she watched Kwame bask beneath the veil of golden fabric, her jaw tight. The crowd believed the story. She had seen the truth, while the applause roared in the ballroom. In a dim apartment across the city, Amahle herself sat before a small wooden table. Her children's laughter had faded into restless sleep, their small bodies curled on a thin mattress in the next room. The apartment was cramped, the wallpaper peeling, the single bulb overhead flickering with exhaustion. Amahle's hand shook as she opened her bank account online. Her breath caught in her chest. The numbers stared back, hollow and blank. The savings she had guarded for years, the inheritance from her mother, the safety net for her children, all gone. Her vision blurred as she scrolled, her pulse loud in her ears. Every line item drained into the same void. Withdrawals, transfers, always bearing Kwame's authorization. Her stomach tightened. She tried again. The same emptiness stared back. She pressed her forehead to the cold edge of the table, tears slipping across her cheeks. In the next room, her children stirred in their dreams, unaware that the ground beneath them had been stolen. Back at the gala, Kwame raised his glass again, the golden veil billowing above him as if it were a crown. He spoke of sacrifice, of how Amahle's courage lived on through every act of kindness the foundation would fund. His voice rang with conviction, smooth as silk. Yet the woman in navy blue standing still at the back saw the tremor in his hand when he placed the glass down. She saw the flicker of his eyes, quick and calculating, as if measuring who believed and who suspected. She thought of the false papers, of the forged signatures, of the orders that erased a living woman. The golden fabric gleamed like firelight, casting shadows that curled like smoke around the edges of her vision. Her purse felt heavy with the stolen truth she carried. The night deepened. Guests danced under chandeliers, their shoes clicking against marble in rhythmic ecstasy. Nia leaned close to Kwame, whispering laughter into his ear. The reporters pressed for statements, their flashes searing white against his perfect smile. He had built his mask so carefully that even the mirrors seemed to bow. Yet in the cracks of the city, in a low apartment smelling of boiled rice and damp plaster, Amahle sank to the floor. She clutched her children as they stirred, small arms wrapping around her trembling frame. The cold seeped through the thin carpet, through her skin, into her bones. Her tears wet their hair as they cried with her, too young to understand but old enough to feel her breaking. Her whisper trembled into the night, a vow spoken into shadows. She would not let her name vanish, even if her world had been stolen. The newspaper on the table bore Kwame's face beneath the headline of his new foundation. She turned it over, unable to look, but the ink had already smudged onto her fingers, staining her skin with his betrayal. The city glowed with two faces, one drenched in golden light, adored, untouchable, the other hidden in darkness, stripped and gasping. Between them lay a chasm no one dared to see, but the air carried the weight of change, the scent of lies burning too brightly to last. The golden cloth that hung behind Kwame, swayed with the faint draft of the ballroom doors, a curtain waiting to fall. Rain hammered the city like fists against glass. In the narrow corridor of a crumbling apartment block, a single bulb flickered, throwing bursts of yellow light into the damp walls streaked with mold. Amahle staggered against the peeling paint, her legs trembling beneath her, her breath rasping sharp and shallow. Her body, drained by weeks of treatment and hunger, buckled under its own weight. She pressed one hand to the wall, fingers leaving streaks of sweat, the other clutching her chest as though to hold her heart inside. From the room behind her came the high-pitched wails of her children. 3 voices tangled in fear, calling out for her, their cries piercing through the storm outside. The sound struck her harder than the rain ever could. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed onto the wet linoleum, the bulb above her buzzing like a dying insect. The hallway smelled of mildew and damp laundry. Shadow swayed with the storm's rhythm. Her palms scraped the floor as she tried to drag herself forward, but her limbs betrayed her, collapsing again under the weight of exhaustion. Her vision blurred, the walls tilting, the cries of her children echoing down the corridor as if the building itself was mourning. She whispered their names, but the words caught in her throat, brittle and faint. Her cheek pressed against the cold floor, and for a moment, the rain outside seemed to seep straight through the ceiling and into her bones. Far away from that darkness, the television glow in countless homes carried another story. Kwame's face filled the screen, his voice thick with sorrow, as he told the world of his late wife's bravery. His eyes shone with perfectly timed tears, his words choked with grief. She fought until the end, he told the camera. She asked me to continue her fight for others. Donations poured in as he spoke, lines of text scrolling at the bottom of the broadcast. The image shifted to his hand on Nia's shoulder, his voice breaking as he promised to honor Amahle's memory. The storm outside the apartment drowned the sound, but the light of the broadcast flickered faintly through a neighbor's window, mocking the darkness where Amahle lay unseen. Back in the dim corridor, a phone buzzed inside a purse left on the kitchen counter. It was Zuri calling. She had tried every night to check on her friend, her voice always steady, always a lifeline. Tonight, the call went unanswered. Again. The storm rattled her small house across town, her own lamp flickering as she stared at the phone screen. Unease settled into her chest. She tried again. Silence. She pulled on her coat, grabbed her keys, and stepped into the rain. Tires hissed on wet asphalt as she drove, wipers thrashing furiously. Her knuckles whitened around the wheel. A dread she couldn't name clawed at her throat. When she burst through the apartment door, her lungs seized at the sight. The children clung together on the mattress, their cheeks streaked with tears. In the hallway, Amahle lay motionless, her skin pale as wax, her lips cracked, the IV tubing trailing uselessly behind her. Zuri dropped to her knees, pressing trembling fingers to Amahle's neck. A faint pulse answered, fragile but there. Relief hit her like a wave. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please hold on." The children wailed louder, clutching at her arms as she tried to lift their mother. She gathered them with her, one arm pulling Amahle's frail body against her chest, the other guiding the children toward the door. Her shoes splashed in the rising puddles of rainwater that seeped through the broken window. Every second felt like the last. At the hospital, fluorescent lights cut through the gloom like harsh truth. Nurses rushed forward as Zuri shouted for help, her voice cracking. Machines beeped, monitors flickered. and a stretcher swallowed Amahle's body as the team wheeled her through swinging doors. Zuri's chest heaved as she stumbled after, the children trailing like shadows behind her. She caught the doctor's sleeve. "She's not gone," she pleaded, eyes wide. "You can still save her." The doctor's face was grave as he nodded, his voice low but steady. "Severe dehydration, collapse from exhaustion, heart at risk." He vanished behind the curtain, leaving only the rhythmic beep of a monitor to mark the fragile tether that still bound Amahle to this world. Zuri sank into a chair, drenched hair plastered to her forehead, her hands trembling. The children curled against her, their sobs quiet now, spent from terror. The storm outside pressed its palms against the hospital windows, rain streaking down like tears on glass. Inside, the steady beep of the monitor pulsed through the silence. Each sound was a promise, fragile but real. Zuri gripped Amahle's limp hand where it lay beneath the blanket. "You are not done," she whispered, her forehead pressed to their joined fingers. "You will not let him bury you twice. You will live, because the truth is still waiting." And while those words breathed life into the silence, across the city, Kwame sat beneath studio lights, his face angled perfectly for the cameras. He dabbed at his eyes with a folded handkerchief, his voice hoarse as he spoke of tragedy. His grief poured into living rooms, his story of resilience wrapping the nation in sympathy. "I will never forget her," he said, lifting his gaze skyward. "Every dollar raised, every patient helped. It is all for Amahle." Applause swelled even in the sterile studio, technicians moved by his trembling sincerity. The phone lines glowed with pledges. The foundation swelled with wealth. The world leaned forward to praise him. No one saw the body fighting for breath in the hospital bed. No one heard the quiet vow pressed into the hum of the monitors. The rain eased near dawn, its rhythm softening against the hospital roof. The storm left behind a city washed raw, streets glistening with reflection, the smell of earth and asphalt heavy in the air. Inside the ward, the doctor returned, his eyes lined with fatigue. "She's stable," he told Zuri softly. "She nearly slipped, but she's stable." Relief buckled her knees. She exhaled a prayer she didn't know she'd been holding, tears sliding into her smile. She turned back to the bed where Amahle's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. The machine's beeps slowed, no longer frantic but firm, a heartbeat in sound. Zuri leaned close, her voice a low murmur, as she brushed damp hair from Amahle's face. "You are still here," she said, her tone fierce, "and you will not let him destroy you again." The words were not for comfort. They were an oath. The children, curled in hospital blankets, stirred and pressed closer to their mother's side. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, of rain-soaked clothes, of survival. The monitors hummed like a second heart, their rhythm a reminder that time had not run out. Amahle's eyelids fluttered, her lips parted too dry to form words. Zuri squeezed her hand tighter. "Save your strength," she whispered. "Your voice will return." But Amahle's eyes, heavy with exhaustion, held the question unspoken. How much had been stolen while she lay silent? The answer glimmered on the television screen in the corner of the waiting room. Kwame's broadcast replayed, his image frozen mid-tier, the headline beneath proclaiming his devotion. The widower who turned sorrow into hope. The children's eyes caught the image, confusion clouding their faces. Zuri pulled them close before they could speak, shielding them with her arms. The truth would come, but not tonight. The monitor's steady rhythm filled the silence. Outside, the first light of dawn pushed against the horizon, pale and relentless. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in every drop that clung to the glass, in every tremor that still shook Zuri's hands. She looked at her friend, at the woman who had nearly been erased, and her voice broke again as she whispered, "You will live, Amahle. You will live, because the world needs to see what he has done." The firewood crackled in the stove, spitting sparks into the dim air of the wooden house. Smoke curled toward the rafters where cobwebs sagged in silence. Outside, the wind scraped against the thin walls, carrying the howl of dogs and the rattle of branches in the night. Amahle sat at the small table, her children gathered around her, their shadows trembling on the plank floor. The papers lay spread before her, brittle as autumn leaves. Zuri's careful hands had forged them with ink that still smelled faintly of chemicals. A new name stared back at her in letters that looked foreign and yet were now her only shield. Naledi Jama. Her heart pounded as she traced the letters with her fingertip, feeling the weight of erasure settle on her chest. She had been declared dead once. Now she was being born again, into a life stitched together by lies, necessity, and survival. The children repeated the name like a secret chant. Their young voices stumbled over the syllables at first, then softened into rhythm. They giggled, finding it strange to call their mother by another word, but they obeyed when her eyes held theirs, firm and pleading. Every repetition was a thread binding them to safety. Outside, rain had left the ground slick with mud. The countryside smelled of wet earth and wood smoke, a world away from the steel and glass of the city. Here, no one knew her face. No one questioned her story. Here, she could walk the market without cameras flashing, without whispers of a coffin. But the price of invisibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. Every time she heard her children call her Naledi, her name, her real name, ached like a wound hidden beneath bandages. The house was small, its beams warped, its paint peeling. Yet in its silence, there was a kind of peace. The children found joy in chasing chickens in the yard, in drawing pictures on scraps of cardboard, in giggling at each other's invented games. Zuri visited when she could, bringing medicines, groceries, and news hidden between glances. They lived in the hush of survival, one day folding into another. Amahle, Naledi now, learned to sew with scraps of cloth, to weave baskets, to barter quietly at the edge of the market. She felt herself vanish into routine, her reflection in the cracked mirror thinner, her hair short from chemo, her eyes carrying shadows that never faded. Each night, she touched the papers again, whispering the false name until it almost became her own. Almost. One evening, while she folded clothes by the dim lamp, the television flickered with a broadcast from the city. The image filled the screen. Kwame, tall and polished, standing beside Nia. His suit shimmered under stage lights. He accepted a plaque, gold shining against his chest, the crowd roaring in applause. The caption declared him Humanitarian of the Year. He smiled, holding Nia's hand aloft as though she were his partner in triumph. The audience wept at his words, praising his devotion to the foundation that bore Amahle's name. In the wooden house, the children's laughter faded as they turned toward the screen. "That's father," one whispered. Naledi's throat closed. She switched off the set with trembling hands, plunging the room back into silence. Her pulse drummed in her ears. Her children's eyes searched hers, but she could not answer their questions. She stood, fists clenched, staring at the darkened screen as if her gaze could burn a hole through it. Her voice broke into a whisper. I am still breathing. The market knew her as a quiet woman who sold crafts for coins. They saw her as Naledi, not Amahle. They saw her as a mother of 3, not a widow erased. Each bead she strung, each stitch she sewed, became a prayer in disguise. Her fingers moved quickly, weaving colors into patterns that told stories no one else could read. The baskets lined the wall of her tiny shop, a faded wooden sign swinging above the door, with letters carved unevenly. Naledi's goods. Customers admired the handiwork, without knowing the woman's true name, without seeing the fire smoldering behind her soft smile. Every purchase was survival. Every coin slipped into her palm, a thread tying her children to the next day. And yet, beneath the surface of every woven pattern, Amahle's name pulsed like a hidden heartbeat. Zuri arrived one afternoon, mud clinging to her shoes, her face shadowed by the hood of her coat. She carried a small bag of rice and a look that spoke of news. Amahle led her inside, their voices low, the children playing quietly in the corner. Zuri unfolded a newspaper, sliding it across the table. The front page showed Kwame once more, his arm around Nia, his smile polished, his eyes shining with victory. The headline praised his dedication, his foundation, his supposed sacrifice. Amahle's stomach twisted. Her hands clenched the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. Zuri's voice dropped to a whisper. He grows stronger every day, more untouchable. Amahle's gaze burned into the photograph. Her silence was heavier than words. She folded the paper and pressed it against her chest, the ink smudging onto her skin. The name beneath the picture was his, but the story, she knew, was hers. Night settled heavy on the countryside. The crickets sang outside the cracked window, their rhythm filling the silence left by words unspoken. The children slept tangled together on the mattress, their breaths even. Amahle sat awake, staring at the papers spread before her again. Her false name gleamed under the lamplight. She whispered it once, twice, but the syllables caught like thorns in her throat. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the slow beat beneath. She thought of the gala, of the lights, of Kwame raising his hand to thunderous applause. She thought of Nia's smile, of the golden foundation banner. And then she whispered again, not the false name, but the real one, her voice trembling but fierce. Amahle. The sound filled the small room like a flame refusing to die. The countryside held her, but it did not heal her. Every step she took under the name Naledi carried the weight of betrayal. Yet survival required silence. Survival demanded she vanish. She taught her children to answer to a false surname, to bow their heads when strangers asked questions. She bit her tongue when the neighbors praised Kwame's speeches. She burned with fury when she saw his face in headlines at the market stall. And every time she returned home, she stared at the wooden sign above her shop, its letters carved hastily. It looked fragile, temporary, like her borrowed life. But beneath that fragile surface she felt a flicker of fire. It whispered that one day she would carve her true name in wood and hang it for all to see. She rose from her chair, stepped into the yard where the night air smelled of wet grass and wood smoke. The stars scattered faintly above, the horizon bruised with the last shadow of the city lights. She closed her eyes, lifting her face to the sky. The cool air kissed her skin, carrying the promise of something beyond survival. She clenched her fists, the ink of the newspaper still smudged on her palm. The world might believe her gone, might raise another in her place. But her lungs filled with breath, her heart beat with defiance. She opened her eyes, the darkness pressing close yet failing to suffocate her. Her voice cut through the silence, steady and low, each word a vow. I am still here. The first flash came without a sound, just a white pulse against the glass. The bead strands in the window caught it and threw tiny sparks across the shop like fireflies. Naledi's hands paused mid-thread. A small carved bird slipped from her fingers and ticked against the wooden counter. Outside, rain hung in the air like a thin gray veil, and beyond it a figure stood still, shape blurred, camera lifted again. Another white pulse. Her children burst into laughter from the corner, clapping at the sudden light as if the sky were playing a game with them. She didn't laugh. She stepped to the window. The figure lowered the camera. A cap, a collar turned up high, a mouth she could not see. Then the shape melted into the rain, swallowed by the slow river of people pushing past the market stalls. Beads rolled on the counter, tiny taps like a heartbeat. She picked them up one by one, cool against her skin, red, indigo, bone white. She ran the thread through her thumb and forefinger to calm the shake. The smell of the shop steadied her. Warmed wood, beeswax, a hint of eucalyptus oil rubbed into the counter. On the wall, her sign tilted a little in the draft, hand-painted flowers around the words, Naledi's Crafts. The children were 5 now. They had drawn the flowers with stubby chalk. She let the imperfections stay. It made the words look like they were breathing. A woman entered with wet hair and tired eyes. She wore a head wrap the color of wet earth. She touched the bracelets on the table with care, as if they were sleeping animals. "For my sister," she murmured, voice low. "Chemo again tomorrow." Naledi nodded. She set out a basket of simple leather cords and hand-rolled beads. No upsell, no ritual speech, just a steady presence and hands that moved with quiet knowledge. She added a small pouch of jasmine tea to the bag without charging. The woman saw and pressed a palm over her heart. Coins moved across the counter. The tin near the register was half full already, a handwritten note taped to the front. For women who need the fight funded, not delayed. People in this town liked the way she phrased things. It sounded like the truth without sounding like a sermon. The children kept to the corner with their small wooden blocks and a tangle of bright strings. They loved the alphabet beads best. They spelled their names, then spelled nonsense, then asked their mother to spell the one she always made them practice. She never wore it, not where anyone could see but the stash of letter beads hid in a jar behind the counter. A-M-A-H-L-E. They knew the sequence by sound now, like a lullaby with 6 notes. She made them say it soft. Boys giggled and turned it into a rhythm. The little girl, always solemn, cupped the beads in her hands as if they were warm. Afternoons had a rhythm. The bell on the door chimed. Someone admired her woven belts. Someone else asked about the market across the river. Someone dropped a coin in the tin and hurried away. People told stories here. They sat on the old stool by the fan and took a breath and let their days spill out in small details. Naledi learned without prying. Who had found a lump and told no one. Who hid pills from a husband with pride bigger than his paycheck. Who needed a ride to the clinic at dawn. She wrote names in a small notebook kept under the counter with neat dates and phone numbers. She had a folded list of volunteers who could drive with gas paid from the tin. She kept a jar of homemade ginger candies near the register for the metallic taste some women couldn't shake. Her own tongue remembered it. Her whole body remembered it. The second flash lit the doorway at dusk. It hit the back wall of the shop and turned the bead strands into a map of stars. Naledi didn't look up this time. She touched the alphabet jar with one finger. as if it were a tiny bell she could ring with her pulse. A man stepped in, tall, clean shoes, a coat too fine for this town. He smelled faintly of steel and citrus, the kind of cologne sold behind glass. He smiled at the children with his mouth but not with his eyes. He picked up a bracelet and rolled it between his fingers. "How long have you been here?" His tone was casual, the way men ask about weather and waste it on you like a coin. "Long enough," she said. "Your work is neat," he said. "Steady." He turned the bracelet over. "Your hands don't shake." "They did," she said. She didn't know why she said it. It left her mouth before she could stop it. His eyes flicked to her fingers as if drawn. He put the bracelet down. "How old are the children?" The smile again. He tilted his head like a man admiring a garden. She didn't answer. He let the silence sit, then covered it with a small chuckle, as if he had made a joke. "This is a good town," he said to the air. "Quiet. Safe." He bought the bracelet and paid cash. New bills, crisp, snapping a little. "Keep the change," he added, and held her gaze a shade too long. Then he left. She watched the window long after the bell stopped chiming. Only the rain moved. Zuri arrived after dark with her coat damp, and her breath visible when she exhaled. She pressed close like a sister lost in a crowd. They didn't hug in the doorway. The light from the back room made halos in her wet hair. "Close early," she said. "No hello." Naledi flipped the sign. She sent the children to the kitchen to fetch the little tin cups. Ginger tea, sweet and hot and full of heat, that felt like a shield. The two women sat at the counter, paths of raindrops slowly drying on Zuri's sleeves. "There's someone," Naledi began. She did not finish. Zuri's nod said she knew. "I met a reporter," Zuri said. "Not the loud kind." She watched Naledi's face, then continued when she saw no fear, only a tightening of the mouth, a smoothing of the brow. "Her name is Adisa Okoro, investigative. She's been following the foundation's money. The word foundation lived in this room like an insect behind the wall. You didn't see it. You felt it. Naledi felt it now, a small movement under the skin of the house. "She has documents," Zuri said. She pulled a folder from her bag. No hospital logo, no return address. Plain and thin and heavy as a secret. She slid it across the wood. Wire transfers, shell companies, donations that leave and come back wearing another coat. She tapped her finger once, twice on a page where a number had been circled in red ink. "Look here. Suppliers that don't exist. A clinic paid twice in 1 week. The money shakes hands with itself." Naledi did not touch the papers yet. She watched Zuri's mouth as she spoke, the careful way she shaped each word, the care not to spit anger where the children could hear it. "She wants to meet you," Zuri said. "No," Naledi said. The edges of the word were soft, but the center was steel. "Not yet," Zuri nodded. She had expected that. She took a breath. "I met her in a diner by the bus station," she said. "She wore a navy coat like you'd wear to court, ordered coffee, no sugar. She keeps a moleskin notebook, old, corners bent. She speaks like a nurse, writing dosage, precise. She doesn't care to be liked. I like her for that." "Why now?" Naledi asked. Zuri slid a new page forward. "She sent formal requests to the foundation last month. Audits. Questions they don't want to answer." Her voice dropped. And then things began to move. Calls to the hospital. Old files flagged. A man asking if a certain nurse still worked there. Me. Naledi felt the muscle in her forearm twitch. She laid her palm on the counter to still it. The rain made a steady sound on the roof, like a hand smoothing hair. "He will suspect," Zuri said. "No need to say the name. It was a stain that didn't need ink." He will send people to look at shadows. Naledi closed the folder. She fed it back across the counter. Not in my house, she said. Keep it with you. If I hold it, I'll burn it. A half smile, no joy in it. And I don't need to read it to know what it says. I saw it in his hands the day he learned to cry for cameras. After Zuri left, the shop felt like a stage after the audience goes home. The children slept in the back room, mouths open, cheeks flushed with heat. Naledi checked the lock twice. She placed the small hammer by the door. Not a weapon, a habit. She threaded beads until her eyes swam. When she turned off the lamp, the strands hung in the dark like rain captured and suspended. Across town, in a booth under a sickly green light, Adisa Okoro stirred a coffee she did not drink. Her notebook lay open to a page with names lined up like soldiers in the margin. She reread the list while the waitress refilled the pot. She saw the trick not in the numbers but in their rhythm. In and out. Disappear and return. No charity moves like that. She had grown up watching money slip from her mother's nightstand. She knew the fingerprints of theft. She pulled a folded photocopy from the pocket of her coat. It was a cremation order. Urgent stamp. Wrong date. The wrongness was small. That was how you hid a bomb, inside a pencil mistake. She slid the paper back and closed the notebook. She spoke no one's name aloud. She paid in cash and left without leaving a tip. Not from stinginess, but because she did not want anyone to remember her by anything but a coat and a forgettable face. Morning brought bread, warm and soft, from the bakery 2 doors down. The shop smelled like yeast and twine and new coin. The man with the fine coat returned, this time without a purchase. He stood in the doorway and let the bell ring twice. "You open early," he said. "Work feeds children," she said. He laughed softly. "You make it sound simple." She handed a bracelet to a schoolgirl with a shy face and loose shoes. "No charge." "It is simple," she said, eyes still on the knot she was tying. "Work is honest. Counting other people's grief is not." She didn't mean to say it. It left her like breath. The man's head tipped. Not offended. Curious. He leaned closer to the window. "Nice sign," he said, reading. "Your name?" "Yes," she said. "Good name," he said, as if tasting it. "Means star, where I come from." Her stomach clenched. He knew too much. Or pretended to. He left again. The bell rang and rang as the door swung shut and the morning tugged it open again. She stood very still. She let the rope of fear pull taut. She did not snap. That afternoon, when the children napped under a blanket in the back, Zuri's text arrived. 3 words. He is restless. No code, no mystery. The simplest messages carried best. Naledi stared at the screen until it went black. She placed the phone face down on the counter. She kept threading. Red, indigo, bone white. She worked until her fingertips stung and the thread tugged like a nerve. By evening, a white sedan idled across the street with its lights off. The driver sat very still. The engine gave a soft, steady purr that reached her in the gaps between laughter and clinking cups outside the cafe next door. A boy kicked a ball. It glanced off the sedan's bumper and rolled away. The driver did not move. Naledi pretended not to see. She stacked bracelets in neat spirals. She listened to her children chatter as they built a tower of spools. When she locked up, the sedan glided forward, then disappeared with a quiet grace that made her teeth ache. She dreamed of it that night. Not the car, the sound of the engine, a throat clearing outside a door forever. She woke before dawn and could not lie down again. Days layered themselves like thin cloth. Adisa's questions moved through the city like a cold current. Offices that never answered suddenly insisted on forms. Meetings appeared that did not exist. Invitations were issued that had no dates. The Foundation's website changed its language so quickly, footers still carried the old words if you scrolled far enough. In a tower corner office, a man pinched the bridge of his nose and told someone on the phone to tighten discretion. Naledi did not see any of that. She smelled it, like ozone before lightning, like meat gone wrong in the fridge before you open the door. The feeling found shape one afternoon when a boy from the post office brought a padded envelope with no return address. Inside, wrapped in tissue like something delicate, lay a brochure from the Foundation with a glossy photograph of Kwame and Nia smiling against a backdrop of golden silk. The silk made her teeth grind. Behind the brochure, a smaller envelope. Inside that, a single photo printed on matte paper. The image was clean and cruel. Mid-laugh, Naledi stood outside her shop, head tossed back a little, sunlight touching the ridge of her cheek. The children clung to her skirts like small moons to a planet. In the far edge of the frame, a mirror caught the street and a slice of a white sedan. On the back of the photo, smaller letters stamped faintly, not written by hand. Neighborhood verification. No signature. She held the paper until her grip left a shadow of sweat. She did not show it to the children. She slipped it into the lowest drawer under the trays of seed beads. Then she carried the alphabet jar to the table and set it down hard enough to make the letters jump. Her hands worked almost on their own. She strung 6 white beads with black capitals. She threaded them on a narrow cord. She breathed with each letter as if nursing a coal back to flame. A-M-A-H-L-E. The name made a small, soft weight in her palm. The children patted out, hair mussed from sleep, cheeks creased from the blanket's edge. They spilled into her lap like puppies. She tucked the necklace into her fist. "We're playing a new game," she said softly. "A secret one." 3 pairs of eyes widened. "What game?" the girl whispered. "Ah, the game of names," she said. "There is the name we use at the market, the name on the sign, and there is the name that belongs to us even when there is no sign. Even when someone tries to take it, we will keep both. But this one," she squeezed her fist, "this one is ours and cannot be bought or erased. Will we ever say it out loud?" one of the boys asked. "Yes," she said, "but not today." They played quietly, strings between fingers, little tongues pressing against teeth in concentration. She taught them to thread without breaking the cord. She showed them how to anchor a knot under the last bead so it would not slip. She told them how the hole in each bead is what makes it belong to the cord. "Empty space has a job," she said. "It lets the thread pass through. In town, rumor rustled like tall grass. Someone said a rich man's car had been seen near the school. Someone else said a woman in a navy coat kept asking about donations. Someone said the girl at the bank cried when an older man raised his voice. Truth wore many faces, and all of them were tired. Zuri came by with new shoes for the kids and a frown like a seam pulled tight. She brought news, too. No paper this time, no numbers. Just a single line whispered while the children chased a moth by the window. "He knows someone is looking." Naledi nodded like a woman who had already counted that possibility and put it on a shelf next to the sugar and the extra soap. She led Zuri to the back where the kettle could cover their words. "He sent a man. He liked the sign. He counted my children with his eyes." Zuri's jaw set. "We can move you again," she said. "No," Naledi said. "He will smell the empty room the way a hound smells a cold fire. He will count what is missing. He will send others. We are not fleeing. We are lifting our name from the water and carrying it dry." She lifted the necklace halfway from her pocket, only enough for Zuri to see the letters flash like a row of white teeth. Zuri breathed out a sound like a prayer and a curse braided together. Evening brought wind, hot and unpredictable. Dust climbed the road and got into teeth. A child cried outside and was shushed by an older voice. The sun slid behind the roof line of the bakery and turned the shop window into a mirror. Naledi watched herself move through that mirror like a woman underwater. She hung the last strand for the night and wiped the counter. She turned the sign to closed. She checked the lock. She checked it again. The children were already heavy with sleep on the pallet in back. The knock did not come. The car did not idle. Silence pressed against the door like a curious listener. She took the necklace out at last and looped it over her own neck. The beads were cool against the notch at her throat. She closed her eyes. The name sat there like a small heart that had finally returned to its place. She walked to the doorway of the back room and watched her children sleep, bare feet tangled together, thumb still in mouth, a small knee thrown across a brother's belly. The little girl's palm opened on the pillow as if waiting to be filled. Naledi knelt and slid her fingers into that palm. Her voice barely rose above the breath of the room. "I promise," she said, speaking not to one child, but to all three, to the woman watching from some future she could not picture, to the girl she had been before the world taught her to lie to live. "I will take our name back. I will put it where no hand can close the lid on it again." On the front mat, something slid under the door with a soft sigh, paper against wood. She froze. The room held its breath. She walked to the door, every step careful, as if the floor might betray her. She bent and picked up a thin envelope. No handwriting, no stamp. Inside, one photograph, the same image as before, but closer now. Her face, her children's faces, the beads catching sun. In the corner, the smallest reflection of a man's cap in the window's edge. Her stomach flipped once and settled hard. She turned the photo over. Blank. She stood very still. The necklace pressed a small line of cool across her collarbone. The promise she had made to her sleeping children still hovered in the air between rooms, unbroken. The question rose with it, and did not settle. Who would come to her door next? The woman in the navy coat, or the man with eyes that did not smile? She slid the photo into the lowest drawer and turned out the lights. The room fell into the thrum of night. Beyond the door, somewhere in the dark, an engine coughed to life and faded away. In the quiet that followed, she put her palm on the beads against her throat and held them there until the warmth of her skin moved into the letters. The glass door slammed so hard it rattled the chandelier. Nia stood frozen in the foyer, her hand still clutching the cold brass handle. Rainwater dripped from her umbrella, spreading dark circles on the white marble floor. The house was too quiet. Not the kind of silence that calms, but the kind that hides something. She slipped off her heels and carried them in her hand, her breath quick. Upstairs, the faint hum of the safe's motor echoed down the stairwell. She had never heard it before, but she knew the sound instantly. Her feet carried her toward it before her mind could catch up. The master bedroom smelled of cologne and ironed linen. The safe stood open in the corner, its steel mouth yawning wide. Papers lay scattered on the desk. She shouldn't look. She knew that. Curiosity had the sharp edge of a blade. It cut both ways. Yet her hands moved before she could stop them. She lifted a stack, and her pulse surged. Certificates, dates, A seal smeared in haste, death certificate, Amahle N'Dour. Another paper slid free, cremation order, urgent. Her throat constricted. The letters swam in her vision. She read them twice, 3 times, hoping they would change, hoping the page would blur into something harmless. But the words remained. A wife declared dead before her time. Her ashes vanished. Her memory transformed into a foundation. Naya's stomach twisted. She dropped the papers onto the desk, the sound too loud in the suffocating room. Her hand trembled as she pressed it against her belly. Life stirred within, small and fluttering. She thought of the child growing inside her. She thought of what kind of man the father truly was. The safe still hummed, waiting for her to close it. She couldn't. Her legs weakened. She reached for the desk chair and lowered herself into it, the papers staring back like witnesses. For the first time since she had tied herself to Kwame, fear bloomed in her chest. Not the fear of scandal or gossip, but the fear of waking one morning to discover that her own life, too, had been erased with a stroke of his pen. The sound of footsteps broke the spell, heavy, measured, unhurried. Kwame entered, his tie loosened, his eyes sharp. He saw the open safe, the papers scattered. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Curiosity, he said, his tone calm, is the hunger that starves those who cannot feed it. He picked up the certificate from the desk and smoothed its crease with care, as though it were fragile silk. His gaze never left hers. Do you know what this paper means? His voice softened, the way one speaks to a child. It means I decide what is gone and what remains. Her fingers tightened on the chair's arms. You loved her once, she whispered, the words slipping out before she could think. His laugh was low, humorless. Love? He folded the certificate neatly, slid it back into the safe, and turned the lock. Love is the leash people give you so you can strangle them later. She gave me that leash. I took it. She was weak. His hand rested on the steel door, then fell to his side. He stepped closer. She felt his presence before his shadow covered her. Don't let weakness cling to you, Nia. You're carrying my blood now. If you falter, I will not carry you. I will bury you. Just as I buried her, her mouth went dry. She rose slowly, forcing her knees not to tremble. She met his gaze. I won't falter, she said. Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. He studied her for a long moment, then brushed past, leaving the room heavy with his absence. The air smelled of cold metal and power. She pressed both hands over her belly, her chest tight. His words clung to her skin, buried, erased. She swallowed hard and knew what she had to do. That night, when the house lay in silence, she wrote by the dim light of the bedside lamp. Her hand moved quickly, urgently, across the paper. The letter was short. Don't find me. Don't trust me. But take this. She slipped it into an envelope along with photocopies of the bank transfers she had discovered. Transfers that bled Amahle's inheritance into accounts that wore new names. She folded the envelope once, slid it into her purse, and prayed she would have the courage to deliver it. The next day, she found the courage. She stepped into a cafe on the edge of town, her coat pulled tight, her hair tucked beneath a scarf. Across from her, a woman waited, her eyes guarded but alive with recognition. Naledi, Amahle, not dead, very much alive. The shock of seeing her nearly undid Nia, but she steadied herself with a hand to her stomach. She slid the envelope across the table. Don't ask me why, she said softly. Just take it. Amahle's fingers closed over the paper. She saw the lines etched by illness, the strength behind the frailty. She wanted to apologize, but words lodged in her throat. Instead, she whispered, "Don't look for me again." She stood and left before her resolve broke. She didn't see the man in the corner booth lower his newspaper and watch her go. His eyes followed her, sharp and suspicious. He reached for his phone, thumb hovering over the dial. Orders had been given. Watch her. Report everything. He rose slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. Outside, he lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke that curled like a signal into the gray sky. His gaze never left her figure as she disappeared into the crowded street. Amahle remained in the cafe, the envelope heavy in her lap. Her heart pounded as she read the letter, the photocopies trembling in her hands. Bank transfers, stolen inheritance, proof that her name had been plundered as well as buried. Tears blurred the ink. She pressed the pages to her chest, whispering through clenched teeth, "No one else will vanish." The vow anchored her even as fear clawed at her. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and she startled, shoving the papers back into the envelope. Only a young couple entered, laughing softly. She exhaled, her hands still shaking. Across town, Nia sat in the back of a taxi, her scarf pulled low, her pulse hammering. She clutched her belly, praying the child inside would not inherit the shadow of its father. She thought of the letter left behind. She thought of Amahle's eyes, alive with fire, refusing to die. A whisper of hope stirred in her chest, fragile as a flame in wind. She had betrayed, but perhaps she could also redeem. The taxi turned onto a quiet street. In the rearview mirror, the driver's eyes flicked upward, cautious. A black sedan slid into the lane behind them, keeping distance. Nia's breath hitched. She knew she was not free, not yet. In the wooden house on the edge of the countryside, Amahle sat by the fire that night, her children asleep in the next room. She read the letter again by the flicker of flame. Her hands trembled less now. She placed the papers inside her notebook, tucking them between pages filled with names and numbers of women she helped. The proof lay hidden, but its weight burned steady against her. She lifted her gaze to the dark window, where her reflection stared back. Her lips formed words barely above a whisper. "It ends with me." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere, far in the city, a man gave new orders to his men, his voice cold as stone. And in a bedroom lined with silk curtains, Nia lay awake, her hand on her stomach, her eyes open wide, knowing they were watching her now. The letter had crossed the line. The safe was not just for papers anymore. It was for secrets too sharp to keep hidden, and those who carried them were marked. Amahle pressed her forehead to the glass, eyes burning, heart unyielding. She whispered again, fiercer now. "It ends with me." The chandeliers blazed so brightly the air itself seemed gilded, and every sequin, every glass of champagne, every polished shoe reflected that flood of light until the entire hall glittered like the inside of a jewel box. Applause rolled in waves as Kwame Diallo stepped onto the stage, his tuxedo tailored sharp, his hand lifting in modest acknowledgement. He paused, letting the roar of admiration wash over him. Cameras whirred, flashes burst, and his name poured from the lips of donors and dignitaries, as though he were a savior. He rested a hand over his chest, eyes shining as he spoke of endurance, of hope, of the wife who smiled through her final breath. His voice cracked at just the right syllable. The crowd leaned forward, caught in the spell. Behind him, the banner of the Amahle Foundation hung in golden folds, gleaming with every angle of light. In the front rows, Nia sat with her back straight, her hands clasped over the swell of her belly. Her smile was practiced, soft, and unwavering, though her nails dug faintly into her palm. She knew what he was. She knew what the papers in her bag meant. Her heart hammered every time the cameras lingered too long, and yet she held her composure, waiting for the moment she had chosen. Across the room, Adisa Okoro stood near the press pit, her pen scratching steady lines in her notebook, her eyes sharp as she tracked the rhythm of the event. The USB drive in her pocket burned with the weight of evidence. She had been patient, waiting for the curtain to tear wide enough for truth to walk through. Kwame raised his glass to toast. The violins swelled, and then, as if the air itself bent, the crowd's gaze shifted. A ripple of silence swept across the room. The doors at the far end opened. In the golden glow of chandeliers and cameras, a woman in a black dress entered. She moved with calm steps, her hair pinned back, her face pale yet resolute. The color of mourning wrapped her body like armor, each fold of fabric whispering of graves and survival. Whispers broke out, a murmur, a shudder. Some gasped, some clutched their pearls. The cameras pivoted in a furious sweep, lights flashing like lightning as they locked on her. Kwame's eyes found her and froze. For one fractured second, his practice mask shattered. His hand gripped the lectern as though it might hold him upright. He recovered quickly, but the tremor had been seen. His voice stumbled as he forced a laugh, too thin, too brittle. "An impostor," he declared into the microphone, his tone brittle under the roar of whispers. "Some cruel person who dares to mock the dead." The hall crackled with confusion, torn between disbelief and the undeniable sight before them. Amahle kept walking. Her heels tapped slow, deliberate beats against the marble floor, each one louder than the last, until the rhythm swallowed the whispers. She stopped in the center of the hall, her eyes lifted, meeting the cameras, the chandeliers, the man at the podium. Her voice rang out, clear, stripped of all trembling. "My name is Amahle N'Dour, and I never died." The hall erupted, screams, gasps, the scrape of chairs. For a moment, chaos, then silence, heavy, crushing, absolute. All that remained was the echo of her words vibrating through the vaulted ceiling. Kwame tried to laugh again, but his throat caught. He gestured wildly. "Security!" But the guards hesitated, caught between duty and disbelief, between the man they served and the woman who stood like a shadow risen from the grave. Before they could move, Nia rose from her seat. Slowly, without a word, she slid the diamond ring from her finger. It clinked as she set it on the edge of her glass. The sound was sharper than any outcry. Then, with a steady hand, she lifted a small drive from her clutch and placed it in Adisa's palm. Their eyes met for one long second, a transfer of trust, of betrayal turned into redemption. Adisa closed her hand around the evidence and nodded. Uniforms moved through the doors, not security this time, but police and auditors in plain suits, their badges flashing in the light. Their shoes struck hard against marble as they advanced, carrying papers and authority that even Kwame's wealth could not dismiss. Murmurs surged. Reporters shouted questions. Kwame's face drained of color. He pounded the podium, his voice rising, straining, calling this madness, a trick, a plot. Yet the cameras had already turned. They filmed not his fury, but the still, silent figure of Amahle in her black dress, her gaze steady, her body refusing to vanish again. For a breathless moment, time itself seemed to stall. Donors clutched at their pearls. Journalists pressed forward, their cameras hungry. Adisa's notebook trembled in her hand, ink smearing under her grip. The officers waited, their eyes shifting between the accused and the resurrected. The air grew taut, heavy as a rope stretched to its final thread, and then the rope snapped. The hall exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted, flashing bulbs burst like stars. Some guests fled, others stayed rooted, transfixed by the collision of lies and truth. Kwame's mask slipped completely. His features twisted, his hands clenching into fists as he shouted denials that drowned in the storm of sound. The Foundation's banner behind him shuddered, as if even the silk knew it had carried a false name. Through it all, Amahle did not move. Her dress absorbed the storm, her silence louder than his rage. The hall, the cameras, the whole watching world held their breath around her. The lie had been pierced. The dead had spoken, and nothing would ever return to the way it was. The red light on the broadcast camera burned like a tiny sun. Microphones leaned in close enough to catch breath. The room vibrated with hush. In that bright stillness, the officer's voice cut clean through the gilded air. "Kwame Diallo," he said, each syllable deliberate. "You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and theft by deception." Metal clicked, hands reached. The polished stage turned into a threshold no one had planned to cross. A gasp rose from the front row, then another, then a scatter of voices that couldn't decide whether to whisper or scream. The chandeliers trembled. The banner in gold silk shivered as if someone had exhaled against it. Kwame's jaw set. He did not step back. He angled himself toward the cameras as if they were the safer witnesses. "This is obscene," he said, his voice smooth but pitched too high. A misunderstanding made for television. Amahle felt the floor's coolness through the thin leather of her heels. The black dress hugged her ribs like a shield. She did not reach for anyone. She did not look away. She stood center hall in a pool of light, designed to flatter donors, and found that it carried another use. Truth had a place to stand. The faces around her blurred at the edges. She heard small things with perfect clarity, the scrape of a chair leg, a pearl bracelet clacking against a wrist, the tiny cough of the officer holding the warrant. Somewhere a violinist still gripped a bow midair, frozen, as if waiting for a downbeat that would never come. The officer continued, voice amplified by the room's perfect acoustics. "We have probable cause to believe you falsified a death certificate and an order of cremation to access insurance proceeds and charitable funds." He held up a folder. White edges glowed. Signatures lay on those pages like footprints in wet concrete. "We have additional documentation showing the diversion of donor assets through shell entities controlled by your office." He lowered the folder with the care of a man who had carried fragile things his whole career, then nodded. Two more officers stepped forward, hands gentled power into motion. Nia did not breathe for 3 counts. Then she did, quietly. She sat straighter and let her hands slide from her belly to the arms of her chair. The diamond ring was gone now. The bare circle on her finger held the light in a different way. Softer, honest. Her eyes found Amahle where she stood beneath the chandeliers. No signal passed between them. Only a fact. One woman standing up, another woman letting go. Adisa moved like a shadow with a purpose. She had been near the press pit, hand closed around a small drive that weighed more than it looked. Now she broke from the line of cameras and approached the officer with the warrant. Her step was polite. Her voice stayed low. She offered the drive with a nod and a quick sentence that did not fill the air, only placed a tile in a mosaic. Evidence shifted hands with the rhythm of a relay race at the last turn. A tech ducked under cables, plugged the drive into a laptop, murmured to a colleague. A screen flickered awake backstage, its blue glow leaking from behind the curtain where the golden silk hung. Numbers appeared, dates, transfers, one by one, in and out. A heartbeat of money following a map it shouldn't know. The crowd could not see the screen. The officers could. Their faces didn't change. They had learned long ago how not to let expression get in the way of duty. One leaned toward the others and tapped the same date twice with the tip of a pen. There, right there. "Don't do this," Kwame said, and for a moment his voice faltered on the edge of something raw. He took a single step forward. The nearest officer said a single word that stopped him. His tongue worked against his teeth. The cameras found every twitch, every fracture. "This is a sick performance," he said, steady again. A woman in a black dress pretending to be... He stopped, because he could not finish the sentence and keep the world he'd built. He stopped because the woman in the black dress did not flinch. "Sir," the officer said, "place your hands behind your back. The sound of metal cuffs in a ballroom is different than the sound in a squad room. In a ballroom, they echo. In a ballroom, they land among music and money and promises made on glossy paper." The click was small. It traveled far. Heads turned. Donors who had laughed a minute ago now studied the carpet pattern, as if it had changed under their feet. A woman near the aisle covered her mouth. A man whispered, "This can't be real." A reporter, eyes bright, whispered back, "It's live." A second voice entered the space, measured and calm. "By court order," said a woman in a dark suit with a badge on her belt. "A freeze has been placed on all accounts and non-liquid assets associated with the Amahle Foundation and related entities." She had a packet in her hand, thin as a blade. "Pending a full forensic audit, these assets will be held under independent supervision. Should misappropriation be confirmed, funds will be transferred to an open, public trust dedicated to verified patient care." Her gaze moved over the hall without apology. "You will be notified." The words did not collide with one another. They landed one at a time, each with its own weight. Freeze, accounts, independent, public, verified, care. In that sequence, the golden silk behind the stage wasn't a banner anymore. It looked like a curtain on a window someone had kept shut too long. Light wanted in, fabric wanted down. Reporters surged forward, microphones outstretched like antennae smelling a storm. They pivoted away from the man in cuffs and toward the woman at center. Names burst into the air. Questions chased one another, tripping. "Where were you? How did you? What do you?" She did not answer their first hunger. She let the noise ride over her like wind over long grass. When it quieted by a shade, she lifted her chin. Her voice landed exactly where she put it. "I came back to be called by my name. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be." The room inhaled the sentence and found itself changed by it. She did not mention hospitals. She did not list injuries or betrayals. She did not give the private story away to be chewed. She refused to feed the spectacle. For a heartbeat, the cameras forgot to move. Then they moved all at once, frantic, trying to catch the exact angle that would let them keep that line without breaking it. A man in the third row rose to his feet. He cleared his throat and asked the question others were swallowing. "Will you sue? Will you take what you're owed?" It was not a cruel question. It was a question people ask when they believe the only math left is revenge. She thought of her children sleeping under a thin blanket in a small wooden house the size of one of these chandeliers. She thought of the alphabet beads that had cut her fingertips and stitched her back to herself letter by letter. She thought of the women who came into her shop and laid coins down quietly, because shame had made them careful. She felt her anger, sharp and honest, and she held it the way one holds a blade at night, not to go hunting, but to guard a door. When she answered, the words were slow, as if she were lifting something heavy without cracking it. I won't spend the rest of my life carrying his shadow. Every dollar that was taken under my name will go where my name was meant to live. On the wrist of a woman who needs treatment, in the gas tank of a car that gets her there, in a clinic where nurses know her by her face and not by a number. She paused. The hall leaned forward. I will not take a cent for myself. I want the accounts open, the reports public, the help simple and fast. Let the world see every ledger line. Let the lies fund the lives. It was not magnanimity, it was architecture, a different building rising on the same ground. The setup for something sharper than revenge had been waiting all along. The tin can near her register, the notebook under her counter with rides penciled in neat, the bracelets that sold for less than their parts, because dignity is not priced per bead. Now the payoff stood where the golden silk used to make everything glow. Truth did not need silk, it needed air. A murmur ran through the front tables, relief in one chair, shame in another. A donor whose name had been stamped on programs stared at his wife's hands and thought about checks that felt good to write. A woman who had saved for months to attend because she believed in the stories on the website wiped her eyes in quick, angry motions. Somewhere in the back, a young intern at the foundation, who had never seen the inside of the safe and never would, closed her eyes and breathed for the first time since she took the job. Kwame tried to speak again, but the metal at his wrists made his shoulders honest. He tossed his hair back the way he always did when a camera was tired. The camera wasn't tired. It was hungry. It filmed the way his mouth formed the word conspiracy, and the way it broke halfway through. It filmed the way he looked at Nia and found no hand to hold. It filmed the way Nia's gaze slid past him and settled on the small drive already far from reach. Now in the chain of evidence no publicist could unhook. One officer read him his rights as they turned him from the microphone. The words were quiet, receptive to any ear willing to hear them. Another officer, the one with the steady cough, made a small gesture with his chin to guide the path through tables and chairs. No one reached out to touch the man whose hand they had shaken on 10,000 sticky evenings. Hands folded into laps. Napkins suddenly needed attention. A path opened. Adisa closed her notebook on the last line and slid it into her bag. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She whispered 2 words to a producer with a headset who had the sense to write them down. Public trust. Then she found Amahle in the crowd and approached with the open caution of someone who keeps her promises. You won't be alone, she said, and those 4 syllables were not for the cameras. They were for the space between 2 women who had both chosen a thing they did not yet know how to carry. Microphones returned like birds to a wire, jittery. Tell us your story, someone pleaded. The plea fell heavy, eager, ravenous. She had told them enough. My story is not a spectacle, she said, and her voice stayed kind even as it drew a boundary. I'm here so that when someone calls my name, it belongs to me. The hall heard the sentence and found that it rang like a bell. Not a church bell that tells the town what to do, but a handbell rung by a mother at a doorway when it's time to come in. Small, clear, final. The broadcast cut to a wide shot. The anchor's voice jittered. The screen split. On one side, the golden hall, the slow walk in cuffs, the black dress holding the center like a steady note. On the other, a simple card with a URL where audits would be posted, where donations could be redirected, where applicants could request fuel vouchers and test co-pays and meals. It looked almost boring. That was what trust looks like from far away, when the lights finally lowered and the room exhaled what it had been holding. The world outside had already begun to change shape. Phones buzzed. Texts flew in tight sentences. A judge signed an order whose language had been drafted days ago and folded in a drawer like a shirt ready for morning. A nurse sent a message to a patient. Try again. The funds might move now. A driver topped off a tank and did not check his balance twice. Amahle walked out beneath the arch, where a valet had been taught to open doors with a flourish. The night air hit her like water after fever. Cool. Exact. She did not climb into any car. She held her small bag against her hip and walked past the line of black vehicles waiting for instructions. Her heels touched pavement the way you touch a path you had to build with your own hands. At the curb she paused. She looked up at the sky, city bright, star stubborn. She let a breath go. It didn't shudder this time. It landed. The ride home was quieter than anyone would expect for a woman who had just undone a myth in front of a nation. Taxi hum. Streetlights sliding across her lap. The driver did not comment. He glanced once in the mirror, saw a face set in a way that made speech unnecessary, and kept his eyes on the road. She traced the edge of her clutch with her thumb. The satin felt like smooth wood after sandpaper, worn just enough to be honest. The wooden house at the edge of the town held its shape in the dusk, like a small boat after storm surge. When she opened the door, the smell of eucalyptus oil and clean laundry rose to meet her. A night moth thudded against the window once, then stilled. In the back room, her children slept in an untidy star, small limbs flung across pillows, breaths even. She stood in the doorway and watched them, the way one watches a fire that needs neither tending nor fuel, only time. Her hand went to the pocket where the necklace waited. She drew it out and let the letters slide into her palm. White beads, black capitals. The cord had been retied twice, the knot neat, the end tucked where no one could snag it. She lifted it to her throat. The beads settled against the notch like they had been measured for that place. She closed the clasp with a sound that would not carry. The name lay warm almost immediately, as if skin and letters had reached for each other and finally touched. She crossed the room and knelt. She slid her palm under her daughter's hand and felt the small reflex that answered even in sleep. The boys didn't stir. One snored lightly through a clogged nose. She smiled. It was not a show. It was a private thing you give yourself when you have survived a day that should have killed you. Outside the window, the last light turned the yard to brass. Chickens murmured from the coop. A dog barked twice and then thought better of it. The horizon held a thin line of orange, the way a seam holds a shirt together. She stood, went to the front of the shop, and ran her fingers over the sign with the hand-painted flowers that listed slightly to the left. The letters read, Naledi's Crafts. The paint had chipped at the N. Her fingertip felt the gap. She didn't change it tonight. You don't rip a name down in the dark. You wake the house in the morning and say it out loud, and then you take the ladder out. She turned back toward the room where her children slept, and the kettle waited to be filled. She set water on the stove and did not turn it on. Not yet. She went to the door, opened it, and stepped onto the threshold. The sky softened from brass to violet. The air smelled like wet earth cooling. She stood there the way a person stands at a dock when the boat that brought them home is finally tied off, and the rope is coiled, and they are not afraid to let it go. Her phone buzzed once in her bag. She didn't move toward it. Messages could wait. The night wouldn't. Across the yard, the laundry line hung crooked, a small shirt left behind by daylight swaying gently. She took a step down, then another, the dirt cool through thin soles. She reached up, unpinned the shirt, folded it against her ribs. Her hand shook, not with fear, with the ordinary tremor of a hand that has been busy all day and found it can still do soft work. The kettle clicked as metal cooled. A truck passed on the road and made the house sigh a little on its old stilts. She went back inside and closed the door with a careful hand. In the hush that followed, she whispered a sentence that seemed to rise from the floorboards and the rafters and the skin at her throat. We are going to live. It wasn't an announcement. It wasn't a prayer. It was a statement of fact that would need doing again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after. She reached up and touched the beads, the letters pressed under her fingertips like small bones declaring shape. The last light left the room, and quiet spread, wide and kind. From the back, a sleepy voice mumbled her borrowed name. She crossed the space, knee to rug, hand to hair, mouth close to a small ear. "Say it right," she said softly, and then with a joy so steady it startled her, she gave the child the word, the real one. The syllables slipped into the room and stayed there, too heavy to be blown out by any breath but their own. A question hovered as the house settled. Not danger, not dread. The simple, hard question tomorrow will bring to the door like the first knock of day. Would the new fund move as promised? Would the sign change by noon? Or would she wait one more sunset to lift the old wood down? Would strangers pass the shop and say her name correctly, out loud, with no permission asked? She did not answer yet. She let the question hang like a lantern in warm air. She lay down between her children, bead letters cool then warm against her skin, and closed her eyes to the sound of small breathing and the faint song of insects outside. The night pressed its palm to the house and held it in place. Somewhere far away, a gold banner sagged in the dark. Here, a thin cord threaded letters into a circle that would not break. The kettle waited on the stove. The ladder waited by the wall. Morning would come. When it did, the first thing she would hear would be a child's voice from the doorway. 3 small words, a name called into light, and the world, having heard her say it first, would have to answer. Sometimes life is not measured in victories that shake the world, but in the quiet defiance of choosing to rise when everything around insists on burying us. There are moments when silence seems easier, when erasure feels inevitable, when the weight of betrayal or injustice presses down like a stone, and yet the human heart holds a rhythm that refuses to be stilled. It is the rhythm of truth, of dignity, of identity reclaimed even after it has been stripped away. Every scar teaches us that survival is not weakness, but proof of endurance. Every loss reminds us that what is taken can be rebuilt in new forms, stronger and more honest than before. And every name, every story, belongs to someone who deserves to be seen and heard, not turned into a tool for power, not erased for another's gain, but honored as it is. The power of reclaiming what was denied lies not in revenge, but in the insistence on living fully, openly, and without apology. There is a lesson here that reaches beyond one life and one struggle. It is the lesson that truth, however long it takes, will push through the cracks. That compassion, when practiced in small and consistent ways, can restore what greed destroys. That dignity is not given by others. It is kept alive by the refusal to let it be taken. And perhaps most importantly, that no voice is too small to matter, no identity too fragile to be protected, no human too insignificant to deserve justice and love. As we reflect on this journey, we are reminded that healing does not come from erasing the past, but from naming it, facing it, and then choosing to move forward with grace. Forgiveness may not always mean forgetting, but it can mean refusing to let bitterness define the rest of the path. And resilience is not born in grand gestures, but in the steady return to oneself again and again, until the soul feels whole in a world that often celebrates power over kindness and illusion over truth. This story reminds us to pay attention to the quiet strength of those who keep going, to believe in the steady force of honesty, to value the hands that rebuild, the voices that rise, the names that cannot be silenced. Because in the end, what remains is not the empire of lies, but the unbreakable heartbeat of truth. Thank you for listening to this story with an open heart. If its message touched you, if you found in it even a fragment of your own journey, or a spark of hope for someone you love, we would be grateful to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below to share your reflections. And don't forget to follow and subscribe so you never miss the next story we bring to life. Your voice, your presence, and your support mean more than you know. Together, we can continue to hold space for stories that remind us what it means to be human,